So you see your friends out there blasting trucks, having a good time, camping, wheeling, all that, and now you're scrolling on Facebook Marketplace trying to buy your first Tacoma, and somehow you stumbled on this video. That's good for you, because I'm gonna show you exactly what you need to look out for when you're buying a used Tacoma. So in this video, we're gonna show you what it's like to walk up to somebody's truck for the first time in their driveway and what you can look out for. And then later on, we're gonna throw it on the lift and show you what we would check as a technician. So the first thing that I'm gonna look at is the frame, because the frame rot on these trucks is so bad, or it can be so bad, that if the frame is all chooched and totally rusted out, I'm not even gonna go any farther with this truck. So let's just look at that first. So there's a few key points to look at with rust under here. That's behind the gas tank, kind of where the frame starts to swoop up. That's the first spot you wanna look. And then the next spot is right behind the cab mount. So let's have a look here really quick. Right here at this swoop, there's different layers to the frame, and they can start delaminating and rusting out from the inside, and it gets really bad really fast. So this one looks really good, but here's an example of some that are really bad. So the next spot that I would always check is right here. Here's the cab mount here. And so on the back side of the frame where the cab mount is notorious for rusting out. So you'll start to have like hollow areas there, or even holes in that area. And then also inside the cab mount, it's very hard to see, but inside it starts to rust out because that's where all the water and mud gets packed into. So now that we've been looking at the frame and it looks great to me, let's move up to the engine, the heart of the beast, and check it out. So when you're looking at the engine for the first time, you want to just obviously do a visual inspection. This one actually looks pretty clean, which is nice. Pull the oil. Holy smokes, it's so tight. Holy smokes. What the heck?
Nobody's checked that one.
Oh man, that was tight. So you want to check this, pull it out, and just have a look at the inside. If it's full of like white scuzz, then you know that the truck's just been driven on really short drives and is full of condensation. And that's something that you want to watch out for. So next up, you just want to look really pro in front of the person that you're buying the truck from so they don't hide anything from you. So you check the oil. It's always going to be okay. If it's not, then you should run away. But this looks totally fine. So while you're in here, you want to look down the sides of the engine, and it'll be pretty easy to tell if it's just covered in oil and scuzz. So you just want to have a look, see that the engine's, somewhat clean. And I'm not looking for dirt, I'm looking for oil. The valve cover is the top here. There's one on each side on the V6. And so you just want to be checking that seam all along there and check for oil coming out there. And then lower down, there's a few covers and stuff like that that you want to be looking for oil. Next up, this is an easy one to change. You can change the air filter super quick, but it's nice to know that it has been changed and been taken care of. It's not just packed with dust. This looks pretty decent, so no issues there. Then you just want to check all your fluids, your brake fluids, if it's a manual, your clutch fluid, your power steering fluid. So you can check, it's really clean and nice, and it's on the correct line there, so all good on the power steering. Coolant here, same thing, right on that full line, and it looks like it's a decent color, so it's a win. Last one is the brake fluid. You just want to make sure it's at the full line. Same with the clutch would be here as well. So let's check those, all good. So one thing is, if you're buying a truck that already has modifications done to it, you want to make sure that those modifications are done properly. You don't want to get something that has a bunch of light bars and looks great from the outside, and then you pop the hood and it's just full of a giant rat's nest. So definitely look out for that. You don't want to be buying a truck that has a bunch of shady electrical work done to it, period. So this has a little bit of electrical done to it already, but it looks pretty clean. It has an actual fuse block. It's done okay. It's not like super shady. So before we give the engine a pass, we want to start it up, make sure it starts up first try, no big issues or hiccups, and also that there's no whine. You can often tell that the idler pulleys or anything like that are starting to go by the sound that they make. So if the idler pulleys are starting to go, they'll have this kind of high-pitched whining noise. So just listen out for that when you're starting the truck. So while we're in here, we can look at the odometer, see how many kilometers the truck has. Here we have 260. So with a Tacoma, I would say low miles is anything below like 100. And then high miles, I would say anything over 200. So there's like that 100 to 200 range where it could go either way depending on how well the truck has been taken care of. When I bought my Tacoma, it had 90,000 kilometers on it. And when I hit about 120,000 kilometers, that's when I started to have a whole bunch of issues. I had wheel bearings going, I had U-joints, I had all this stuff, the brake calipers are seizing, all that kind of stuff. So definitely watch out for that. Also with a higher mileage truck, sometimes a lot of stuff has already been replaced and it's good to go for a long time. So another thing that I'm looking at when I'm in here is, especially on a hot day like this, the AC. It's gonna be hard to check if you're buying a truck in the winter, but you wanna make sure the AC blows cold, you wanna make sure that the heat turns on. And then another thing, especially if you wanna get into off-roading, is you wanna check that the four-wheel drive works. So just flick that switch into four-wheel drive, you push this button in and turn it, and go into 4 low, and then the 4 low light will light up on the dash. Sometimes when you're doing that, it won't engage right away, and you might need to roll the truck back and forth. It just depends on how everything's lined up, if they're binding a little bit. So if you have to roll back and forth a little bit to get it to go, that's totally normal, don't worry about it. So if you have a rear diff lock on a truck, which is something that I would be personally making sure that the truck had if I was buying one, then the button should be right here. You want to click that. There's a light that comes on the dash with a little X through the rear axle. That one, you definitely have to drive back and forth a little bit before it engages. You might have to turn the wheels just to get the rear tires to spin a little bit. When you're buying a used truck, it's a really easy way to tell if the truck has been bashed on by looking at the common spots that will be hit when you're off-roading. So if you look underneath, you can just look at the front skid plate and know, hey, there's big dents here, this thing has been wheeled, or if it looks totally clean and new, then you know it hasn't really been rocked that hard. Then you can look at the rocker panels under the doors here. A lot of times if it doesn't have sliders, these will be all smashed in. And then a really good point to look at is looking at the rear hitch. So this will drag on the ground really commonly when you're off-roading, and this trailer hitch plug is like the telltale sign, because this thing is low-hanging fruit and it will get smashed off basically the first time you go off-road. That's why we relocate these pretty often. But if this guy's still here, you know it hasn't really been abused that hard. So once you've had a good look around the truck, that's when you want to be asking the person you're buying the truck from a few different questions. Try and get a gauge of how they use the truck. Did they use it just as a daily driver? Did they go camping with it all the time? Did they wheel it hard? Are they like flexible on the price? You know, different things like that that are gonna tell you how the truck was used, as well as just how the person's feeling, gauge their vibe, you know, like you just wanna get the best deal you can, because obviously they're looking for the best deal they can get as well. So now that we've checked everything on the ground, how you would in a driveway, we're gonna pass it off to Matt, one of our technicians here at Overland Outfitters, to check the additional stuff that we would look at when we have it on a lift to do a pre-purchase or post-purchase inspection.
So as you've seen from Braden, there's a lot of stuff you can check on the ground and stuff in the driveway, but it is nice to get it up on the hoist and check some things further. So now that we got it up, we're gonna pull the wheels and we'll start with checking the brakes. Check the brakes, we're just gonna have to knock this drum off, and then basically it's just a visual inspection, and we can check the boots and stuff on the wheel cylinders to make sure there's no leaks or anything like that. These things are usually on there pretty good, especially if they haven't been off in a while, and you just want to avoid breathing in any dust. Okay, so we'll start by just checking the brakes, making sure the shoes aren't cracked or anything like that. They do get little cracks in them sometimes, but just making sure there's no big chunks or anything taken out of it. And then obviously the thickness of it. You can see how much you got there. Then we can start pulling these boots back. And all we're looking for here is just to open it up, make sure it's dry inside. If that's all full of fluid, then we know that there's fluid getting past the seal and leaking out. It's not catastrophic, but it's something to note, and make sure you get replaced as soon as you can. This is all stuff that's under tension and pressure, so we gotta make sure that there's nothing broken. Everything looks good. So after we're done checking the brakes, then we'll just have a quick visual of everything else. It's kind of, you can see the other side of the frame when the wheel's off, so it makes it easier to see stuff that you can't see when you're on the ground laying on your back. So we'll just go over the bushings and stuff, make sure that they look good, although this is stuff that you can still check on the ground. And then look over the leaves, make sure there's no cracks. If it's starting to crack on this side and you only look from the inside, it just gives us a better visual looking with everything off the vehicle. The next thing under here that we want to check is U-joints and stuff. It's hard, you can check them on the ground, but the vehicle's usually loaded up, or if it's in park, there might be tension on them. So it's nice to have it in neutral off the ground, and then everything's loose, and we can actually give it a good twist and shake and know that we're checking it properly. In the center of the drive shaft, there's a carrier bearing. It is a rubber isolated bearing in here, so there is going to be some play in it, but that's a good amount. If it's flopping back and forth or it's very loose, then there's definitely too much play. You could also look and see if the rubber's all cracked, or if there's rust and stuff like coming out of it, then there's probably an issue with that bearing and it needs to be replaced. While we're under here too, this is a good spot for us as technicians to come and take a look at the frame. There's stuff you can obviously check on the driveway, on the ground, but we've seen a lot of times where people kind of look and they think it's good and it comes in here, and when we actually get it up and have a good look, this is all split and flaking and stuff. Some of the really hard to see spots, or spots that you might pass over, are up in behind the gas tank here on the driver's side. That's where a lot of the rust forms, even up in behind it where this leaf spring perch is. So although you're crawling around on the ground, if you don't have a light or something, it can be trickier to see, because there are going to be rusty Tacomas, but it doesn't mean they're garbage or anything. It just means they're rustier. So to have a professional kind of take a look at it, they can give you a better opinion if you're not too sure. So once we're done with the back, then we'll come up to the front and check over the front brakes here. Basically what we're checking is the pads and making sure that the caliper is not seized and that the slide pins are clean, free of movement, so that you're not going to get a seized brake caliper. So you can see the pads in here and then the rotor in between. If you give it a spin, you can see the difference. That's your pad material. So we're just checking to make sure that that again isn't cracked, or that it's so thin that you're almost running out of pads. Another thing we'll check for is to make sure it's not seized. So if we can spin this freely, then we're good. There will be tension from the axle, but making sure that it's not locked up super tight and then that there's a problem with the caliper. When we're checking the tie rods, sometimes it's easier if you can get someone to shake the wheel for you and then get your hand on it, and if there is some play in it, you can kind of feel where it's coming from and then visually see, because it's kind of hard to lean over the tire and look in. So I'll get Braden to come over and give me a shake. So this is your outer tie rod with the little ball joint in here that goes into the knuckle, and then your inner tie rods threads into your steering rack over here. So when he's shaking it back and forth, there is a joint in here and this joint here, and those are the 2 points you're checking for play. This one's harder to see, so you really do have to feel it. So for those of you that are still running a sway bar, these are a couple points that you can check. There's going to be a bushing up on the front of the frame here, one on this side, one on the driver's side, and a sway bar link on the back side here. You can kind of grab it up and down. You can usually see too, if it's all worn out, there'll be a bit of a gap in there. And then making sure that there's no play in these 2 joints here. If you've got a new truck and you don't even know what's on it, it might not even have a sway bar if someone's already lifted it and done the off-road stuff to it. So you don't have to worry about it at that point. So we're just gonna remove the skid plate, and then we can have a better visual of kind of underneath up into the engine bay and stuff like that. So this one's just a couple 12 mil bolts. So you might be buying one that's already got some mods. It's probably not stock. So this is where we can check over your vehicle and make sure it's not super smashed apart. You know, it can look pretty good, and then when you actually get it up on the hoist, you start seeing telltale signs of, oh, it's been hit here, it's been smashed there. Find little bent things, and this is a good spot where we can take a look at it, and it's stuff you might not see while you're laying on the ground. Now that we can see kind of up from the bottom, we get a better visual at some of the lower pulleys, the belt itself up in there. You can see if it's cracking or not. See if there's any rust around all the idler pulleys or the tensioner pulley. If there's rust all around here, that's a good sign that the bearing's wearing out. So on the older Tacomas, like the first few years of the second gens, like 2005 and up, there's a cover up in here, kind of just behind the power steering pump, and that can leak pretty bad. So That's another thing we can check while we're looking in from the bottom. This is the big one. When we get the trucks in, we got to check the cams on them because the lower control arms, they seize on a lot of trucks. Even like a year or two old, they can be seized, and it can cause you a lot of problems down the road if you're trying to do a lift or get an alignment done on your vehicle. A lot of other shops would probably overlook that when you're getting an inspection. You know, they'll check everything else over, but they're not going to undo these bolts and check them. So far, maybe. Alright, so that sound isn't always a good sound to start with. Okay. So if they're not seized, this should rotate pretty freely. I shouldn't have to put a ton of force on it to get it to move. That's already beyond. I think it's safe to say that these lower control arms are seized in there. Here under the vehicle, we'll check the rear diff, the T-case, the transmission, if it's a manual. If it's an automatic, it's a little more difficult. And the front diff. We'll just check the fluid, make sure it's not burnt or smelly or anything like that. So I'm just gonna pull the fill plug, not the drain plug, which will be down here at the bottom. And then basically just put my finger in there, and you can see the fluid on there. It's pretty clean. If it comes out black or something, then we know there's a problem. But this also lets me check the level too. If I'm dipping my pinky in there and I'm not getting fluid on it, I know the fluid's too low in the housing. So I can check the fluid and the color of the fluid. Just gonna check the ball joints on this, and by doing that, we're gonna jack it up underneath the control arm so that we can unload the suspension and take all the tension off the ball joints. So these arms are on a weird angle when the trucks get lifted sometimes, and they're a little harder to capture, but you can usually do it. Okay, now that we got it up, we've compressed the suspension a little bit, and then that takes the tension off the upper ball joint and the lower ball joint. So now we can come in, again, give it a little shake side to side, a little up and down, and make sure that we don't feel anything flopping around. And then finally, we'll take our bar and we'll just pry up underneath and check the bottom ball joint and the upper ball joint, as well as the lower shock bushing or bearing and the upper control arm bushings, just to make sure that there's no play in these. So it might be hard to see on the camera, but this lower ball joint, you can see a little bit of play up and down if you look really closely. So that's a sign that this one's starting to wear out.
So after watching this video, I hope you feel totally confident getting out and buying your first Tacoma on your own. If not, feel free to bring it by the shop. We'll do a pre-purchase inspection for you so you know that you're dialed 100%. And yeah, go and buy your first Tacoma, have a good time, meet your friends out on the trails, and we'll see you out there.